I remember the sound first. It wasn't thunder. It wasn't fireworks. It was the sound of paint cans exploding, one after another, like small grenades, splattering color across the driveway and front lawn. When I turned the corner that morning, my street looked like a war zone. My house was on fire. Not the whole thing, just the walls. Blue flames licking the siding, pieces of white vinyl melting down like wax. And in the middle of it, a man in a polo shirt was screaming into his phone. I told him this color wasn't allowed. I told him. Then I saw it. The logo on his shirt, HOA. And right beside him, 3 other men holding clipboards and a can of gasoline. For a moment, I didn't move. The smell of burning paint filled my lungs, sharp and chemical. It felt unreal, like I was still asleep. I'd been home from deployment for only 6 weeks. And now the place I rebuilt with my own hands was being destroyed by a group of neighborhood bureaucrats who didn't like the shade of my house. They called it non-compliant turquoise. I called it freedom blue. The exact color of my unit's insignia. The color of home. Then one of them turned to me and said, "Sir, you need to step back, this is official HOA business." And that was the moment everything inside me snapped. I didn't shout, didn't move, didn't even breathe, just stared at the fire eating through the place where I'd hung my medals. And in that silence, I realized something that would change everything. This wasn't about paint. This was war. The next thing I remember was chaos, sirens, neighbors running, the sound of someone crying. A woman, my neighbor, Carla, was shouting my name, "Daniel. Your garage, someone's inside." Through the smoke, I saw movement. A shadow against the light. Someone crawling, dragging their leg. And for a split second, I thought I was back overseas. Another burning building, another civilian in danger. Instinct took over. I ran toward the flames, kicked through the door, and pulled out a man covered in soot. He wasn't from the HOA. He was one of the painters. His face was pale, eyes wide, like he'd seen something worse than fire. He whispered, trembling. "They said it would just be a warning." "Not this. Not this." I dragged him out to the lawn just before the garage roof collapsed. The explosion knocked me back, ringing in my ears. The world blurred into black and orange. And that's when I heard it. The siren tone that wasn't from a fire truck. It was a military distress signal, my own frequency. Someone was using it, from inside my house. For a heartbeat, I thought maybe one of my men had found me, that this was some training overlap. But then I saw it. A blinking red device half buried in the dirt, hidden beneath the burned grass. It wasn't mine, and it was active. I reached for it just as it beeped once, then stopped. Static in my earpiece. Then a single voice, cold and broken. "You shouldn't have come back, General." Everything froze. The fire, the shouting, it all went quiet. I looked around, but the voice was gone. Just smoke, heat, and the wreckage of what used to be my home. And that's when the HOA president walked up to me, holding a folder. "You'll receive a formal notice tomorrow," he said calmly. "You've violated community standards. Your paint color is not permitted under Section 12 of the Neighborhood Aesthetic Agreement. Total fines due, $2.3 million. I stared at him, ash falling like snow between us. And all I could think was, he doesn't know who he's talking to. He thought I was just another homeowner. He didn't know that I commanded 300 men. He didn't know what I'd seen, or what I was capable of. He didn't know that when I rebuild stronger. The fire trucks arrived, but the damage was done. Half my house gone. Every piece of my past turned to ash. But in the middle of all that loss, something inside me hardened. This wasn't over. They thought they could scare me with fines, with rules, with fire. They had no idea they just started a war they couldn't win. I looked at the burning wreck one last time. And I said it out loud, more to myself than anyone else. If they want to fight, they'll get one. Then I turned away from the flames and started walking toward my truck. The screen on my dashboard flickered, a message from an unknown number. 4 words. "You're not the only one." That's when I realized this ran deeper than HOA politics. Something darker. Something organized. And as I drove away through the smoke, I promised myself one thing. Before this is over, the world will know what really hides behind the word HOA. I sat in the cab of my truck, the heat of the burned siding still licking the air. Paperwork in my hands. The fine, $2,300,000. And a threat. Pay within 14 days or face legal action. I knew the board wouldn't stop there. They never did. One path was clear. pay the fine, cut my losses, pretend it never happened. The other, fight them, risk everything, money, reputation, even safety. Paying meant humiliation. It meant saying, you win. You control me, my home, my life, my legacy, yours to dictate. Every fiber of me recoiled. I could hear the echoes of my unit shouting in my head, never submit. Never retreat. And yet, paying promised immediate relief. My home wouldn't burn further, no escalation in court, no neighbors gossiping about a ruined general. Fighting meant exposing myself. It meant endless legal battles, financial strain, and retaliation from HOA members who had influence. They were connected, politically entrenched. Filing the challenge could drag my family into the mud. And worse, public humiliation if I failed. I stared at the house through the cracked windshield. Half the siding melted, black smoke drifting from the garage. Children on the street pointed, whispering. Neighbors peeked from behind blinds, judgment in their eyes. The weight of the choice pressed down on me. Pay and live quietly. Fight and risk annihilation. I felt the bile rise in my throat. Every instinct screamed fight. Every strategy instinct screamed caution. I imagined my grandchildren. What story would I tell them? Grandpa gave up his home to bureaucrats? No, I couldn't allow it. Then came a knock on the truck window. I looked up. 2 HOA board members, smiling like predators. Hope you've considered the consequences, General, one said. His tone was smug, a deliberate reminder of the system's power. Every muscle in my body tensed. I closed my eyes. I could pay and preserve what little remained of my home. Or I could fight and assert control, even if it meant risking everything I loved. I pictured the courtroom, the papers, the media frenzy. I pictured my family standing beside me, the eyes of every neighbor, friend, and rival fixed on me. Every second I delayed made both choices bleed harder. And then I remembered my oath. The one I swore before I commanded my first unit. Protect, defend, never submit to tyranny. The HOA had crossed a line. This wasn't about paint. It was about principle, justice, and legacy. I made the decision. I would fight. I called my attorney. Drafted a formal objection. I submitted proof of the house's historical color, my research, and references to legal codes protecting architectural heritage. I sent a copy to the HOA president with a single line. Consider this your warning. I do not pay fines for what is rightfully mine. I didn't know the full consequences yet. I only knew one thing. I would not back down. Every heartbeat pounded with anticipation, fear, and adrenaline. And somewhere deep inside, I felt the first spark of what this fight would become. A war that would shake not just a neighborhood, but the very notion of who controlled it. I drove off, smoke curling behind me, ash in my hair, and a voice whispered in my earpiece, someone I didn't recognize. Every second you hesitate, the board tightens their grip. Be ready. I clenched my fist. This was no longer about paint. It was about power. And power was about to be tested. The day after I submitted my objection, I woke to a new nightmare. My mailbox had been torn from the post, bent like a weapon. A note inside, scrawled in red ink, compliance or consequences. I felt the familiar pulse of anger and anticipation that always followed injustice. Outside, a pickup truck idled on the curb, headlights off. I didn't recognize it. Through the tinted glass, I could see movement, figures pacing the lawn, cameras discreetly recording my home. The neighbors peeked nervously from behind their curtains. Some avoided my gaze entirely. Inside the house, my attorney called. They're preparing counterclaims. They want the color declared illegal retroactively. And they're talking about liening your property. I gritted my teeth. Lien. Millions. My family's home. The fine wasn't just a number, it was leverage. I knew I had to act strategically. I reviewed every HOA regulation, cross-checked historical codes, and compiled archival evidence proving the original paint was authentic. I drew diagrams, took photographs, and wrote a detailed timeline of renovations. Every small detail mattered. Every brushstroke, every receipt, every letter from preservation societies. Then came the first verbal confrontation. The HOA president arrived unannounced, clipboard in hand, friendly smile painted across his face. General, the community is watching. We suggest compliance. I looked at him without flinching. You're watching, but you don't understand what you're dealing with. I realized they were probing me, testing my resolve, so I set traps of my own. I installed security cameras, documenting everything. I discreetly spoke to neighbors, subtly reminding them of my authority and connections. I knew the battle wouldn't be won in a meeting room. It would be won in perception, documentation, and intimidation without ever firing a shot. That evening, a dark car idled near the corner. Someone filmed the house from the street. I recognized the subtle movements of people trained in observation. It wasn't just wah, someone had escalated. A message arrived via text. Stop now, or things will get worse. I sat in the living room, the smell of smoke from the previous fire still lingering, staring at the walls. I could pay and survive quietly. That option shimmered like an oasis, safe, clean, done. Or I could escalate, use my training to control the battlefield legally, strategically, and psychologically. The choice wasn't easy. Each option carried pain. Paying meant submission, humiliation, and giving them power. Escalating meant a war, uncertainty, and potential loss of everything I loved. I chose escalation. I created a strategy plan like I would for a military operation. Assess, counter, anticipate, control. Step 1. Document everything. Step 2. Gather allies. Step 3. Control the narrative. I spent hours rehearsing every potential confrontation, every court argument, every public statement. I imagined every scenario where Wah tried to humiliate me, and I preemptively built responses. By nightfall, I was exhausted but focused. The tension in the neighborhood was palpable. Neighbors whispered, glancing at my house. Some feared me, some were intrigued. I felt the weight of responsibility, not just to my home, but to my family, my principles, and the precedent I might set. I knew retaliation was coming. I had to be ready. The Wah had underestimated me. They didn't know I was a National Guard general. And generals don't break under pressure. They adapt, they plan, they strike strategically. This wasn't just a fight for paint. It was a war for respect, principle, and legacy. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew this was only the beginning. The battle lines were drawn. The first skirmish had already taken place, and both sides were preparing for the inevitable next move. Every decision now mattered. Every glance, every word, every motion, critical. The neighborhood was my battlefield. The Wah was my adversary. And the stakes were higher than anyone could imagine. The morning was quiet, almost eerily calm. The kind of silence that grips a neighborhood before a storm, where even the birds seem to hesitate. I stepped onto my front porch, surveying the wreckage of my home from the previous night. The blackened siding reflected the rising sun in harsh streaks of orange and gray. Ash still drifted down like snowflakes, coating the lawn. I could see the outline of my partially burned garage. The door sagged on its hinges, warped from the heat. The smell of scorched wood lingered in the air, a pungent reminder that my peace had been shattered. Every instinct screamed at me that this battle was far from over. The first sign of escalation came in the mail. A thick envelope, stamped and official-looking, the Wah logo glaring at me like a threat. Inside, hundreds of pages detailing new fines, violations, and legal threats. Every line of text was meticulously worded to intimidate. They were trying to crush me financially, psychologically, and socially. And yet, each page, each bureaucratic attack, fueled a fire inside me. I read each word slowly, analyzing, marking discrepancies, and cross-referencing with municipal codes. Some lines contradicted themselves, others ignored historical preservation laws entirely. I underlined, highlighted, and tabulated every potential weakness. This was no longer a neighborhood disagreement, it was an organized attack, a test of my resolve and intellect. Neighbors began to notice a shift. Cars parked unusually close to my driveway. Strangers loitering at odd hours, taking notes, photographing the property. Some whispered in my presence, others avoided me, uncertain if I was friend or foe. I could feel the tension vibrating through the air, a collective anxiety that radiated from every house on the block. The Wah was leveraging not just law, but social pressure. They understood that fear is contagious, and control often comes from intimidation rather than direct confrontation. But I was no ordinary homeowner. I had faced hostile situations where stakes were life and death. I had trained to anticipate, to strategize, to counter every move with precision. That afternoon, the first Wah official showed up in person. I recognized him from the surveillance footage, a middle-aged man, overly confident, carrying a clipboard and a camera. He smiled as if this was a casual neighborhood check-in, but his eyes betrayed his intentions. He began pacing my lawn, snapping photos of the house, making notes out loud. Every movement was deliberate, designed to provoke a reaction. I stepped out onto the porch, arms crossed, unwavering. "You again," I said, my voice calm but firm. He froze, momentarily startled by my presence. "General," he said, trying to recover. "We just want to ensure compliance." "Compliance with what?" I asked, leaning forward slightly. "The community standards. The standards that violate historical preservation law?" I countered. His expression faltered, but he quickly regained composure and muttered something about internal review before retreating. Inside, I convened my war room. Not literally a war room, but my study transformed into one. Documents spread across every surface, legal codes stacked like fortresses, photographs lined the walls to track every irregularity in HOA activity. I reviewed every past meeting, every complaint filed, every board member's voting record. Patterns emerged. Certain members were aggressive, others hesitant, some were inexperienced but easily manipulated. I formulated strategies for each. Every action I took was methodical, calculated, leveraging my training and tactical knowledge. By evening, the HOA escalated publicly. They sent an email to the neighborhood. Warning: the property at address is non-compliant. Fines may be applied. All residents should take note. The message was calculated to spread fear. I could see the subtle shift in the eyes of my neighbors the next day, some anxious, some curious. But I also recognized opportunity. Every intimidation tactic is a double-edged sword. Visibility creates vulnerability, but it also creates the possibility to turn perception to your favor. I prepared a public statement, neutral in tone but assertive. The property in question complies with historical preservation laws. Any fines or penalties contrary to these regulations are subject to legal challenge. I reached out to local historians, preservation societies, and civic organizations. I shared documentation, photographs, and historical evidence of the property's original paint and design. Responses were supportive, lending legitimacy to my case and creating a network of allies ready to testify if needed. This wasn't just defense, it was counter-offense. Every ally I gained strengthened my position, made the HOA appear overreaching, and amplified the stakes in my favor. Then came the first direct act of sabotage. A hose was left running in my driveway overnight. Water seeped into my garage, mingling with the charred remains of last week's fire. I awoke to a soggy, ruined floor and a note tucked under my door: "Next time, consequences will be personal." I recognized the pattern. They were trying to provoke me, hoping I would react emotionally. But generals are trained to respond strategically, not impulsively. I documented everything, every detail, every threat. I installed additional cameras, motion sensors, and lighting designed not just for protection, but as a psychological deterrent. Every inch of my property became a fortified command center, invisible to outsiders but meticulously monitored. As the week progressed, the HOA filed preliminary legal motions. They requested temporary restraining orders, attempted to freeze my bank accounts, and threatened liens on the property. Each action was calculated to push me into submission. I countered methodically, submitting historical evidence, legal references, and public statements to preempt their tactics. I was patient, anticipating every escalation, knowing that the first misstep could cost me the house, my reputation, or worse. I felt like a general in a battlefield not of soldiers, but of paperwork, public opinion, and strategic maneuvering. Then, something unexpected occurred. A group of neighbors approached me, hesitant but determined. They were tired of HOA overreach, but afraid to act individually. I realized I could turn their fear into strength. I explained the situation, shared the legal documents, and encouraged them to observe and support. Suddenly, the battlefield had shifted. I wasn't just defending my home. I had created a small network of allies, witnesses, and supporters. Every move by the HOA now had to consider public perception. Every action they took could backfire dramatically. By the end of Key Point 4, I had transformed my house, my strategy, and my mindset. No longer was I merely reacting, I was controlling the narrative, anticipating moves, and turning the bureaucracy into a battlefield I could manage. The stakes were higher than ever: financial ruin, social humiliation, and the threat of escalating conflict loomed over every decision. Yet, with every calculated action, I gained confidence, allies, and insight into the weaknesses of my adversaries. The HOA believed they could crush me with fines, intimidation, and fear. They didn't realize that in every move, I was not only defending my home, I was preparing for a decisive counterstrike that would shake the neighborhood to its foundations. The courthouse smelled like old coffee and paper. Marble steps, echoes in the hall. I felt the weight of everyone's gaze. My family sat in the second row. My wife held my daughter's hand tight. My attorney stood by me like a steady rock. Across the aisle were the HOA lawyers. Sharp suits, collected faces, smug. They had the community's money behind them. They had time and resources. They had designed this fight to bleed a man dry. I walked to the front, palms cool, voice steady. The judge looked like someone who had seen too many small-town wars. He tapped his gavel. The room hushed. This was not a battlefield of bullets. It was a battlefield of words. But wars are wars. Before the hearing, my attorney laid out the choice like a map. Settle now. Take a public apology. Pay a fraction. Move on. Or go to trial. Fight everything. Expose them. Win or lose with all the risk. Both roads hurt. Both roads asked for sacrifice. Settle meant safety. It meant my family didn't have to relive the flames. It meant I would keep the shell of normalcy. It meant the HOA would keep its power. They would keep the precedent. I would be quiet in exchange for peace. Trial meant exposure. My military background could become a story. It meant names in newspapers. It meant hearings and publicity. It meant digging into HOA records that might show more than just bad taste. It meant my identity, the one they didn't know, would be public. Both paths cut. I thought about my oath. I thought about my father, who had never backed down from a fight. I pictured my granddaughter asking why her grandfather let a committee decide his house color. I could see my wife's tired face under courthouse lights. I could feel the judgment of neighbors, some supportive, some fearful. I imagined the gaggle of reporters on the sidewalk, pens poised. My attorney looked at me. "General," he said, "Lo, you want to fight, we fight. But know this, they will come at you. Hard." I nodded. I had already decided. There are fights you do not surrender. This was one. The hearing opened. HOA counsel played the safeguard. They read rules. They showed minutes from meetings. They spoke of community standards. They painted a portrait of order, of reason. Their tone said, "We are guardians. You are the outlier." Their witnesses were neighbors who dreaded change. One old man spoke of property values as if they were scripture. He bent his fingers around the microphone like a rosary. When it was my turn, I stood and spoke plainly. I told the story of how I restored the house, how I matched the original color from archived photographs. I spoke of my documentation, receipts, paint chips, a yellowed catalog from the Architecture Society, photographs of the house in the 1950s. I laid out the law, preservation statutes, local codes, state precedent. I kept my voice controlled, short, precise, but beneath the cool words was a heat that wouldn't be contained. Cross-examination was a tactic. Their lawyer tried to unweave my credibility. Questions about my temperament, about my role, about whether a man of influence could force a standard. He probed like a surgeon. He waited for me to twitch. I didn't. I answered simply. I refused to become bait. Then came the HOA's surprise. A witness, a contractor, a man who claimed to have performed the original renovations. He produced a handwritten note, dated, saying the house had been painted the current HOA-approved color in the 1980s. It looked like a losing card. Their counsel smiled. The judge glanced down. A murmur moved through the gallery. My stomach tightened. This could end the case before it began. My attorney leaned to me. "We can concede this point and settle," he whispered. The thought of settlement brushed my skin like cold water. The safe path, the sensible path. But I felt anger, not fear. I felt the pull of principle. "Not yet," I said, low. "Let them play their hand." Then I went to work. I asked permission to present new evidence. The judge, careful, allowed it. I called a historian. She was small, quick, and steady. She had spent decades cataloging mid-century houses in the region. She brought a catalog. She brought a ledger from the original paint manufacturer. She had letters from the previous owners. Her testimony was like a slow light burning through smoke. She described techniques, pigments, batch numbers. She explained how weathering changed dye. She compared samples. Her microscope images, the court watched them project, revealed layers, undercoat after undercoat, the original turquoise hue trapped beneath decades of overpainting. The contractor's note now looked like half-truth. A revision. An incomplete memory. The judge's expression shifted, interest replacing idle attention. But the real blow came when my attorney asked about the contractor's business ties. He traced the man's invoices to a local vendor. That vendor had contracts with the HOA. Small connections, but they hinted at influence. The court records showed payments to the contractor after HOA board meetings. Timing. Coincidence, the contractor claimed. But the ledger painted a pattern. Public pressure swelled. Reporters had camped outside. Video feeds rolled. My name trended that night in local threads. The story had a beat, General versus HOA, and everyone loves a battle of David versus Goliath. But the exposure cut both ways. It revealed my rank. Old wounds reopened. Questions about why someone with my background would spend days on a paint dispute. The press tried to reshape my image. They asked, "Why are you wasting resources on a house color?" They implied excess, ego. In court, the HOA's counsel tried another move. He motioned to seal certain documents, argued privacy, neighborhood safety. The judge denied it. Transparency, he said, favored the public interest. Papers that HOA wanted private were now public. I watched as their strategy to outlast me, to bury me in closed-door agreements, began to unravel. The critical moment came when the judge asked for proposed remedy. The HOA wanted fines, penalties, a mandate to repaint within 30 days. I stood to present an alternate, recognition of historical status, a requirement that the HOA review its guidelines under state preservation law. No fines, no penalty, a corrective measure and a look into process. I spoke of precedent. I spoke of fairness. The courtroom waited. The judge read, then paused. He considered legal history, statutory language, and the faces before him. Neighbors, a general with ash in his hair, a small community insisting on visual homogeneity. He weighed the law and the public record. He examined motives. I could see the cogs turning behind his eyes. When he spoke, his voice was measured. He found that the HOA's enforcement likely contravened preservation statutes. He denied the fines. He ordered a temporary injunction preventing the HOA from imposing penalties while a full review occurred. He also ordered an audit of the HOA's practices. The room erupted into murmurs. Some cheered softly. Others glared. Victory tasted raw. It was not complete. The HOA could appeal. The fight could continue for months, years. Papers would be filed. Lawyers would circle. But in that moment, I felt vindicated. I had stood my ground. I had used law and reason, not force. I had brought light to a small tyranny. Outside, reporters shouted questions. My phone buzzed with texts, friends, estranged colleagues, old soldiers. My family looked relieved but wary. I felt the adrenaline fade and the weight remain. The ruling was a reprieve, not the end. Then came an unexpected consequence. My identity, my rank, my past, all now out in the open, became fuel. The HOA's supporters painted me as a man using influence. New articles suggested I had resources to bully neighbors. Threats arrived, anonymous, thinly veiled. A brick hit my mailbox the next morning with a note, "Watch your colors." My wife cried that night. The dilemma lingered. The choice to fight had brought victory in court. But victory had a cost. The exposure drew new enemies. Secrets leaked in ways I hadn't foreseen. The battle had moved from legal rooms to social media, to whispers, to personal threats. The HOA could no longer hide behind meetings. They were exposed, but so was I. I sat alone in my study that night. The house smelled faintly of smoke and old paint. I traced the rim of the framed court decision. The ink felt like both armor and target. I had chosen the hard road. I had chosen the truth over ease. I would sleep. For now, the injunction meant they could not fine us. But the legal war would continue. Appeals would come. Public opinion would shift. The battlefield had widened. And somewhere beyond the courthouse, beneath the polite facades, someone watched. They did not like what the judge had done. Their eyes were not restrained by law. This was the first court victory. It was a wound and a shield. It changed everything. But it also started a chain I could not fully predict. The morning after the court victory, silence greeted me. But it wasn't peace. It was the quiet of tension. Windows were open, birds chirped as if nothing had happened, but I could feel eyes. Everywhere. The neighborhood had changed. Some residents whispered behind curtains. Others openly glared. My mailbox had returned, but it held nothing ordinary. Flyers, anonymous letters, threats thinly veiled as concern. Be careful what battles you pick. Your family could be next. Not everyone wants historical accuracy. I carried the court decision into my study like a shield, but the moment I set it down, I knew the war was only beginning. The media had arrived. A local news crew parked outside, cameras pointed at my house, angles designed to capture scorched siding and burnt garage debris. They knocked politely, then immediately began asking questions. "General, some say this is an abuse of influence. How do you respond? Do you think the neighborhood feels safe with you fighting the war? Why risk public exposure over paint?" Each question felt like a jab, a probe, an attempt to draw me into emotion. I remained calm, clipped responses. I refused to give them drama. I gave truth. This is about the law and historical preservation. Nothing else. Social media erupted. Neighbors posted photos, speculation, even doctored images of my house as a fortress. Comments ranged from admiration to outrage. The WA, meanwhile, sent emails to the community, framing me as a disruptive influence, someone who bent rules to personal whim. The pressure was mounting, every channel buzzing with tension. At home, I convened my family. We went over security, legal updates, and media strategy. I had to protect them, not just legally but emotionally. Every day, a new email, a new comment, a new threat. Even friendly neighbors hesitated, unsure where loyalties lay. I could feel the subtle social isolation creeping in, small silences, delayed greetings, diverted glances. It was a tactic as old as time, isolation to weaken resolve. The dilemma grew sharper. Do I engage publicly, defend my name, risk escalating tension? Or do I retreat, maintain privacy, and risk the narrative being written by my adversaries? Both options cut deep. The first could inflame the WA further, create personal attacks, and draw more media scrutiny. The second risked misrepresentation, allowing lies and fear to spread, weakening my credibility and support. I chose balance, selective engagement, strategic messaging. I drafted statements to media outlets, clarifying historical facts, emphasizing legality. I scheduled interviews with preservation experts. Every word, every pause calculated. This was not showmanship, it was tactical warfare. I had to control the story while shielding my family. But the WA didn't stop. They escalated intimidation in subtle, insidious ways. An email signed concerned residents claimed neighbors were disturbed by my house's appearance. Another anonymous note suggested accidents could happen to anyone in my driveway. The threats were no longer just legal, they were psychological. I realized that the battle wasn't just about the house, it was about control. They wanted to break me, force submission, prove authority. I trained myself to recognize every tactic. Every threatening email, every social post, every whisper in the neighborhood, analyzed. Patterns emerged. Timing, language, frequency. I could predict their next move. I reinforced home security, cameras, locks, lighting. I even began early drills with my family, not panic, but preparedness. Evacuation plans, communication signals, safe zones. This was war, and the battlefield extended beyond law to daily life. At night, I lay awake. The adrenaline from court and media battles made sleep difficult. I thought about the safe path, paying fines, quiet compliance. It would have saved us from social scrutiny. It would have spared my family anxiety. But I also imagined the consequences: submission, precedent setting, giving power to overreach. I imagined my granddaughter learning that her grandfather surrendered to fear. My chest tightened. The choice was painful, unavoidable, necessary. Then came the first personal attack. A car drove slowly past my house, tires crunching gravel, no headlights. I watched from a second-floor window. Two silhouettes, masks. The next day, a rock shattered a window. A note inside read, "We are watching. Next time, it will hurt more." The stakes now felt tangible. No longer just laws, fines, or social pressure. This was real danger. My choice to fight had consequences that could reach anyone I loved. Yet, within this chaos, opportunity emerged. Local historians, civil rights advocates, and preservation groups rallied. Letters flooded into the WA. The media attention now highlighted my legal rights. Public opinion slowly shifted towards sympathy and intrigue. The WA, attempting intimidation, now faced scrutiny. They were exposed as bullies, as manipulators, as people who underestimated me. I realized the strategy. Patience, documentation, precision. I couldn't react emotionally to every slight. I could not allow fear to dictate action. Every move had to be measured. Every response deliberate. Even under pressure, even when threats escalated, I had to remain controlled. The neighborhood transformed into a chessboard. Every glance, every post, every interaction was a move. I began tracking HOA members, allies, sympathizers, and those susceptible to influence. I studied patterns, routines, meetings, private correspondence. I compiled dossiers, notes, photographs. Not as intimidation, but as preparation. Preparation for a legal, tactical, and social counterstrike. By the end of Key Point 6, the dilemma had fully matured. Paying was safe but dishonorable. Escalation brought danger but upheld principle. The choice had been made. The consequences were unfolding. And the battlefield, legal, social, and personal, had widened far beyond the paint on a house. They chose Saturday, a day when the street was full. Neighbors washed cars. Kids rode bikes. Old men sipped coffee on porches. The sun made everything look ordinary. That ordinary was the stage they wanted. Early that morning, a flyer appeared on every mailbox. Professionally printed, glossy, the HOA logo prominent. The text was blunt: Community Information Meeting, Enforcement of Aesthetic Standards. Attendance required. They framed it as civic duty. As housekeeping. It was a trap. I knew what they planned. They wanted a spectacle. They wanted to gather the town and present me as the anomaly. They wanted whispers, disgust, and the slow work of social death. They wanted neighbors to turn away. My wife asked me not to go. She wanted no drama. She wanted safety for our family. My daughter feared the cameras. My granddaughter did not understand why Sunday would not be normal. I saw their faces and felt the weight of consequence. If I walked into their event, I risked more than my pride. I risked my family's peace. If I stayed home, the rumor mill would run wild. The choice was raw and immediate. We drove there together. I wanted them to see me with family. Not as a general, not as a litigant, as a neighbor. But I also wanted to stand my ground. The community center was packed. Folding chairs lined in rows. The HOA board at a long table at the front. Lights bright. Microphones ready. The smell of coffee and sweat thick in the air. Cameras from a local station set up in the back. The audience shifted as we entered. A few people whispered. Someone called my name under their breath like a warning. The HOA president rose and smiled. He had the practiced calm of a man who'd rehearsed his lines. He opened with platitudes about unity, maintenance, and property values. Then he leaned forward and said the words they had prepared for months. He described how my house violated the community aesthetic. He displayed photos. He read letters. He read the fines. He chose words that would sting. They brought witnesses. A neighbor testified that my house made kids afraid. Another spoke about resale values. A realtor cited comparative listings. Each statement was designed to reduce empathy, to make me less human in the room. They wanted me to be a cautionary tale. The humiliation was their weapon. They wanted me to shrink in public. I felt the burn of anger, but also the clarity of strategy. Humiliation can break a man if he reacts. It can break a family. I had trained for far worse. But training does not erase pain. It sharpens control. Then they tried something else. A video. A montage of community testimonials. Edited music to tug at heartstrings. The final frame lingered on a photo of my burnt garage. The audience murmured. A few clapped. The president looked triumphant. He assumed victory. I had a choice. Storm out like a cornered animal and feed their narrative. Or respond with precision. Both would hurt. Storming out would feed the spectacle. A measured response risked being drowned by their format. The dilemma cut clean. I stood. I walked to the microphone. The room quieted enough to hear a pin drop. Cameras angled. My family watched from the second row. For a moment, I remembered other rooms like this. Briefings in tents, strategy sessions in war zones. The mechanics were the same. You show your face. You set the tone. You take command. I spoke slowly. Short sentences. No grandstanding. No threats. Just facts. I described the house's history. I presented the preservation certificates. I told the story of the first owner, an immigrant craftsman who had painted that turquoise by hand. I described how the color matched a naval insignia, a small, personal detail that made the house human. I kept my voice steady, but inside, my heart hammered. I didn't shout. I refused to give them the spectacle. Instead, I offered them a choice. Not their choice. Mine. I announced that I had filed an official complaint with the State Preservation Board. I explained that I had copies of payments connecting the HOA contractor to board members. I said I had witnesses willing to testify in public about threats and intimidation. I told them about the late-night surveillance, the anonymous notes, the rock through the window. I told them I had recorded conversations. The words landed like small explosives. Murmurs. A few gasps. The president's face went pale. He had expected me to crumble, not to pull back the curtain. They tried to regain control. The president called for order. He accused me of smearing the community. He claimed I was trying to weaponize bureaucracy. He said I had escalated matters needlessly. The room became a battleground of words. Then a woman in the back stood. She was elderly, voice shaky but fierce. She said she had lived in the neighborhood for 50 years. She remembered the original color. She remembered the craftsman. She said she had received a photocopy of a suppressed HOA meeting where they discussed enforcing conformity. Her hands trembled as she slid the photocopy toward my attorney, who took it and immediately began to review it. The photocopy mentioned discouraging preservation claims and applying pressure until compliance. It referenced meetings not noted in public minutes. It referenced payments. The room shifted again. The veneer of civility cracked. Now the pressure turned both ways. The crowd divided into those who felt betrayed by HOA tactics and those loyal to the board's promises of order. Voices rose. People argued. Reporters pushed microphones forward, sensing the story had become more than a paint dispute. They wanted conflict. They wanted scandal. The president tried to regain dignity. He demanded that I withdraw my accusations. He motioned for a recess. That motion saved him from immediate answers. He wanted time. Time to coordinate. Time to spin. Outside, as the crowd thinned, a man approached me wearing a baseball cap pulled low. He introduced himself as a neighbor who supported me. He whispered, "We've seen this happen before. They do this to everyone who resists." His voice was low, urgent. He handed me a small envelope. Inside were photographs and a thumb drive. On the drive were recordings, phone calls, messages, evidence of the HOA's attempts to intimidate, including a voicemail threatening to make an example of anyone who refused to comply. The evidence was a weapon. But weapons cut both ways. Releasing it publicly could humiliate more than the HOA. It could expose weaknesses in our social fabric. It could tear the neighborhood apart. The choice was brutal. I returned home with the envelope in my pocket and the weight of decision heavy on my shoulders. My wife asked if I would use the recordings. I looked at her, at our children, at the framed photos on the mantle. How would exposing the HOA publicly affect our lives? Would it make the neighborhood hostile? Would it put my family at risk? Or would silence be complicity? Both options were painful. Silence would allow bullying and erosion of rights to continue. Exposure would burn bridges and make enemies. I thought of small consequences, boycotts, angry signs, cold shoulders at holiday barbecues. I thought of large consequences, lawsuits, violent reactions, smear campaigns. Each path offered pain. I chose to leverage the power of the story without reckless release. I publicized selected pieces of evidence. Not everything. I released enough to blow the cover off their intimidation but left room for legal maneuvering. I presented the recordings to my attorney and the press with a concise narrative. I made the argument not emotional, but procedural. That these actions showed a pattern of intimidation that undermined the HOA's legitimacy. The response was immediate and chaotic. Social feeds lit up. Neighbors called friends. The local news ran a special segment. The HOA demanded retractions and threatened defamation suits. Their lawyers sent letters warning of legal consequences. The president accused me of fabricating evidence. The division in the neighborhood sharpened into two camps. Threats escalated. Anonymous messages became more direct. My wife found a note tucked under the front door with a list of names, neighbors who supported me, with the ominous line, "We will remember who stands with the general." Fear became a tangible thing in our home. People we had trusted avoided eye contact. Invitations stopped coming. At the same time, a ripple of support formed beyond the neighborhood. Preservation groups offered legal help. Local activists organized a protest in front of the HOA office. A podcast reached out to interview me. My email flooded with offers, some sincere, some opportunistic. I had to filter allies from those seeking spectacle. The dilemma reasserted itself. Continue revealing, continue exposing, press for full justice and risk fracturing the social fabric completely. Or step back, accept a narrow victory, and attempt to heal the community. Both options demanded sacrifice. I recalled a lesson from deployment: winning a battle is not the same as winning the peace. After taking ground, you must secure it. If you don't, the victory collapses into chaos. I kept that in mind. I chose a calibrated approach. I would force accountability but attempt to reconstruct bridges. It felt impossible. It felt like walking on a thin ridge above a canyon. What followed was a tense week of maneuvers. I coordinated with legal counsel to send formal complaints to the state board. We worked with journalists to publish verifiable facts. I maintained my public posture, calm, resolute, and focused on law rather than vengeance. I attended neighborhood events to show presence without provocation. I invited skeptical neighbors for coffee. I answered questions honestly. Yet, even as I tried to heal, fractures deepened. Friendships died quietly. Children's playdates were canceled. A neighbor returned a loaf of bread on my porch and wrote "not now" on the wrapper. Snubs felt worse than direct attacks. They hurt in a way violence could not. Then one night, my house alarm tripped. Cameras showed a figure at the back gate. I called the police. They arrived and found tire tracks and a thrown object, something meant to frighten. The police filed a report. It was another escalation. The HOA posted on their private forum that the incident was unrelated. But my inbox filled with anonymous accusations. They accused me of staging events for sympathy. The absurdity of that claim was almost laughable. But the smears stuck in the social feeds. My wife began to consider leaving. She spoke of moving to a quieter town, of escaping the constant surveillance and vitriol. The thought of uprooting my family curled in my gut like a physical pain. My decision to fight had consequences that reached into the private sanctum of family life. A choice again, double-edged: quietly retreat and preserve family peace, or continue pushing and risk losing the life we'd built. I chose neither in haste. I chose to double down on security and outreach. I would not run, but I would not let fury guide me. Strategy would. I met privately with the HOA president. He wanted a truce. He wanted me to withdraw evidence, to allow them to correct mistakes quietly. He promised reform. I looked at him, at his polished shoes, at the lines around his mouth, at the practiced softness in his voice, and I saw calculation. He wanted the scandal buried. He wanted his power intact. I offered a public path, a mediated forum with independent oversight, transparency, binding agreements, an external auditor. My terms would force accountability. He balked. He feared exposure more than reconciliation. The talk broke down. The weeks that followed were a blur of hearings, interviews, and neighborhood meetings. The social fabric frayed. My daughter was called names at school. My wife received a threatening voicemail telling her to leave while she could. The personal toll mounted. But something else happened. The truth is a stubborn thing. With each disclosure, more neighbors came forward privately to say they had been bullied by the HOA in small ways for years. Stories that had been whispered now formed a chorus. The narrative shifted slowly. It no longer looked like me being vindictive. It looked like a pattern of abuse that had finally been forced into daylight. That shift brought new allies. An attorney from a neighboring county offered pro bono help. A historian wrote an op-ed condemning the HOA's tactics. A councilman called for a hearing. It was small victories, but they mattered. By the end of this chapter, the humiliation attempt had backfired. The HOA had tried to break me in public. Instead, they revealed a pattern of behavior that could not easily be dismissed. The cost, however, was real. Our life had been upturned. Our privacy invaded. The neighborhood would never be the same. The dilemma remained unresolved in a single sentence. I had struck a blow, but the war widened. I had exposed a monster, but monsters fight back. I had to decide what kind of victory I wanted, a total rout or a durable reform. Each carried different scars. As night came, I sat on my porch, watching the streetlights hum on. Shadows moved, voices drifted. I held my granddaughter on my knee and felt the steady little weight of her breathing. I looked at my wife, tired but resolute. I thought about how the next choice would shape not just my house, but our future. I thought of the general I had been and the neighbor I wanted to be. The street was quiet now, but the war had reached a new temperature. They had tried to break me in public. They had failed to make me small. But they had not stopped. The moves ahead would be harder. The consequences deeper. And the stakes higher than any of us had imagined when a simple color became the spark. I sit alone on the porch. Night swallows the street. The wind whispers through the trees. The house stands silent, scars visible. Ashes from the fire shimmer faintly in the lamplight. I think about every choice, every threat, every neighbor, every note, every rock, every message. The weight of it all presses on my chest. I speak quietly to myself. Was it worth it? To fight? To expose? To risk everything? The street is empty. No cars. No voices. Only the faint hum of distant lights. Memories flash, courtroom tension, the crowd, the flyers, the threats. I remember fear. I remember resolve. I remember the moment I chose not to back down. And then I hear it. A low, metallic sound behind me. Slow, deliberate. I turn. Nothing. Just shadows. Just the hum of the night. A flash of movement. A glint. Then, silence. I freeze. My heart pounds. The world narrows. I whisper again. It's never over, is it? And then, something hits. Hard. A sound I cannot place. A motion I cannot track. A presence I cannot see. The porch shakes. The house groans. And then, everything goes dark. No warning. No explanation. No time to react. Only the echo of my own words. It's never over. And the world changes. Irreversibly. The street lies silent. But something has begun. Something no one saw coming. The night swallows it all.